Hey, CBP. Nick Burgoyne here with AFP, Aseptic Fruit Purees. And this is Getting Fruity, Effective Processes and Strategies Surrounding Aseptic Fruit Purees. We're going to talk about, some equipment, some strategies that you can use in your brewery to kind of utilize fruit and, some little tricks along the way. Before I get too deep into this, a little background on me. I've got like 15 years brewing experience. I was working for Sweetwater here in Atlanta for 15 years, doing various things, pretty much everything in the brewery except, lab. I mean, I kind of had my hands in everything. So that's kind of how I was in a unique position to take on this job. And hopefully that knowledge and experience will be useful to you guys out there. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. Little brief company history. So we started in 2015 with just frozen purees for food service, and it had sugar added. And actually, when I first met these guys, that's the puree that I was using. And I kind of found that with it being frozen was a little bit of an issue. You had to wait for it to thaw. You don't want to, shock your beer. The sugar was kind of an issue because I noticed that it was fermenting out, and with all that additional sugar and that vigorous fermentation, it was essentially stripping the beer of the aroma and flavor. So it would just ferment out and kind of not leave anything behind. So once in 2015, 2017, we kind of, the company came to the realization that the brewing industry was thriving and a lot of fruit beers were becoming popular, and it was just a good industry to get into because, number one, everyone here likes beer. We're craft beer lovers. And so it took about, a year or so to kind of get all the aseptic packaging on board and no sugar added. And that's when that was like the game changer evolution to the beverage industry and kind of focusing on craft breweries, craft beverages. Yeah, like I said, we're all beer fans. I came from the beer industry, and everyone else in the company just, goes out, buys craft beer. And, we just want to support that community because, that's what we enjoy doing. And so we, kind of embraced the local brewing community here in Atlanta. And then that spread. And now we are kind of across the country. We have a warehouse in California, one in Florida, and we hope to be getting into other markets soon. This is a little shot of our one of the farms in Colombia. So we mostly source from Colombia and Mexico, like the red prickly pear and some of the other things, but primarily we're a Colombian company. And, that's get into that a little bit later. It's kind of important to keep in mind everything that's happened in that country over the last 20, 30 years, because that's all kind of that all has to do with how we got sort of involved with them and what we're trying to do and our commitment to those great farmers that we have. So all of our facilities are certified ISO 22000, FDA approved, kosher certified, non-GMO, halal statement, and we comply with all HACCP processes. We have all these certifications available on the website, which is asepticfruitpurees.com. Easy enough. This is actual photos of the facility here. we're packaging them aseptically, which means that it's free of any bacteria or any microbial activity whatsoever, making it ideal for, when you're adding it to anything that you don't want any bacteria or microbes, spoiling anything, out competing your yeast, which is rare, but, it does happen. And, in some cases. Ingredients: pure fruit, ascorbic acid, single strength. So with the ascorbic acid, that's basically vitamin C. And, some breweries are actually embracing that and putting vitamin C on their packaging, as like a health benefit, as much as you can do that without doing that. So it's basically put in there to scavenge dissolved oxygen, because oxidation, as we all know as brewers, is like, number 2, number 3 on the things we don't want. I think bacteria is probably, microbe activity is number 1, and then, light. But oxygen is definitely up there, probably number 2. Could be argued number 1. Who knows? We don't concentrate our purees. They are single strength. There will be, the water that's naturally in the fruit and the sugar, but we don't add anything beyond that. We don't cut it with anything. No juice, water, or chemicals. And do not panic with tart puree. I've gotten some, concerned people when we send out samples saying, hey, this seems like it's very tart compared to other purees that we've gotten in the past. They're all going to be a little bit different due to the bricks, but the main underlying thing is that, this is all just the fruit, minimal sugar, and with that little bit of ascorbic, and then also just the citric acid that's naturally in the fruit, it's going to be a little tart. Some people are used to like a sweeter puree, but that's just probably because of where it's sourced and, other factors. But so basically, if you get a sample set of purees and you think they're tart, don't panic. And we kind of recommend mixing them with a base beer. Tasting them, just doing like bench trials is one thing. But what is really interesting is when you kind of mix it with even water, you'll get a better idea of, how the fruit is going to come through in the beer itself. So I recommend just like a base beer, like, pale ale that's not very hopped. You could even do a light lager, or a seltzer is actually a really good base, just to kind of see what is going on with that fruit and what it's capable of when it's, mixed with, liquid. Another cool picture of Colombia. Wild ales, sour beers, IPAs, and lagers. The sky is the limit, but not limited to beer. So we don't want to forget about hard seltzers, RTDs, mead, and ciders. And then, these are the most common, I would say, fruited beer styles. But really, I mean, there's no limit. Your creativity, is, you can be as creative as you want with this stuff. And it's cool how we're seeing people like keep pushing it, like pushing the envelope, coming up with different things, and, just constantly improving processes. With hard seltzers, we've seen a lot of, people adding, basically just adding it to the seltzer after the fact. Seen some people actually ferment the fruit out with the hard seltzer. And that works in some cases. If you don't have a lot of off flavors from, depends on how you're making your seltzers, what yeast you're using. The yeast nutrient is the big thing when you're trying to get those things down to get that flavor out. RTDs, that's becoming a huge thing. I've written a lot of blogs about, the RTDs are coming. They're already here, but this is basically a cocktail in a can. And I've got some cool stuff coming up in the equipment section that talks a little bit more about some cool strategies you can use to employ when you're making an RTD, or really anything when you want everything mixed up in solution and you don't want any like sediment in the bottom of your cans or package. Mead and ciders, they're kind of in a different league. There's different ways that you can do that. A lot of people seem to be adding it post like fermentation, or adding it actually during. We just got an apple puree, which is interesting for, anyone who wants to make a cider. I had a customer call and ask about apple because they were trying to kind of get around the classification of a cider being, and like just using like fruit puree and adding it to like a pale ale. So it's basically a cider, but it can't be classified as such. Or a seltzer, which comes across, when it has apple, it comes across, as kind of like as a sparkling cider of sorts, which is really interesting. And that's kind of what I'm talking about with, people pushing the boundaries and just kind of thinking outside of the box. It's really cool to see. So these are the guidelines that we get a lot of questions about, how much should I use and when should I use it? That's kind of a hot debate topic. There's kind of two camps. One is adding it during fermentation, and one is adding it post fermentation. The advantages to adding it during fermentation is you get a chance to ferment out that sugar that is naturally there in the fruit. If you want a more dry beer with the essence of the fruit, I guess would be the best way to say it, without having too much, sweetness there. And of course, you can increase the amount of puree you're using, and if the sugar ferments out, you're just going to get like more of a fruit character, more fruit forward. So that's why that range is kind of a wide range in the beer category right there. Got to stay caffeinated. You can add it post fermentation, and a lot of people do. And it's kind of a recommendation, not like trying to tell anyone what to do or anything, but it's a recommendation that you stabilize your beers before you put them in package. If you're not going to be able to pasteurize them, because that could potentially be a dangerous situation. But I used to do this in my days of brewing, but we would just do it with kegs that were never going to leave the brewery, or kegs that were going to stay cold. And we knew, like, if it was going to an account or something, that it would stay cold just in case. And especially with like wild ales or something like this, where you actually do have live bacteria, yeast still in your beer. And so that is definitely a dicey situation. But basically, I mean, I was just kind of using it to, if I had a beer that was like bone dry and needed a little back sweetening, that was a neat trick to do. And you could probably get away with it, another way. But, this is just what we hear from brewers and, what is going on the market. A couple of years ago, there was like a lot of talk about like exploding cans and stuff like this. And now that, people are utilizing pasteurizers, that's like a trick that, if you add your fruit like post fermentation and then put it through a pasteurizer, you've got that sweetness. If you want to make something that's really sweet, but you want it stable. So that's something that is also was not super common in the last, so many 10 years or whatever. That was something that like, only the big guys had. But now, especially with people diversifying their, programs as far as, doing other beverages like, canned coffee, sodas, anything. And now that, everyone is sort of under this FDA umbrella now, it's people are, looking at getting these things, and it really does make a difference as far as that stabilization. And I know some breweries that do it just because they don't want their beer to change once it leaves the brewery, and that's another valid point for that. So then we've got Seltzer, moving on to that. And Seltzer is kind of like the same difference. I talked about that a little bit. I've known some, if you're doing, like if you're making your seltzer super strong and then diluting it, that's when you kind of will have to add it post fermentation, because in order to brew that at high gravity, you have to add so many, you have to add like yeast nutrient, you have to add, stabilizers to like, or pH buffers. And by the time you do all that, you end up with, something that is, you've got a lot of yeast nutrient and stuff in there you need to clean up. And the best way to do that is like filtering it out through like a plate and frame or, something. But I've also known other like smaller operations to just use some kind of like a quake yeast or, something to ferment it out rapidly, maybe with another yeast. And then, and that'll ferment it out completely. And they'll actually add the fruit toward the end of fermentation and let it ferment out. And you're not getting those byproducts from all the yeast nutrient, and you're not completely stripping out the flavor and aroma of your seltzer. It kind of just depends on the setup you have and, what makes sense to you. See, moving on, cider and mead. There's like a little bit more of a range there, just because similar situation to what we were talking about with the beer. There's, a lot more room. You can add it like during fermentation or post fermentation. And those are, kind of the exact same things that I went over with beer, but can't forget about cider and mead. Processes using aseptic fruit purees, whether you're adding primary, secondary, or post fermentation, we got you covered. So that was kind of what I was going into, with just the various times to add it. And, on our website, there are several blogs I wrote about the different times, all the pros and cons. I think we actually have a CBP post also. Thanks, Andrew. That's explaining that. And I've also done, some things in the past And also just, the best thing, honestly, is talking to other brewers and just kind of seeing what the community is doing. Not saying you should follow what everyone's doing, but it's really great when you can connect with people and, just share like little tricks. And I mean, I think that's like one of the coolest parts of the craft brewing community is that everyone is, for the most part, trying to share knowledge and, kind of want to help each other out. And it's just, it's cool when, people can work together like that. And, that was something that I always enjoyed in my years of brewing. So now we are getting into the meat of this presentation. I know everybody is wondering about these, these strategies and equipment, and it's different everywhere, but we'll just start with simple bag opener. I don't have a picture of that right here, but on our website, we have these available. It's just an easy way to pop the cap off of our bags. And talking about that a little bit, we're actually in the middle of a transition. I know some of you that have ordered from us before have noticed that we had these blue caps that were almost impossible to get off. And that was basically just due to they were used to fill them, and we know that that's not the best ideal way to do it. So we've changed the caps, and I believe they're all these yellow caps now that are much easier to get off, and especially with one of these bag openers. And I think it was exacerbated by the supply chain. So we didn't switch those over in quite the time that we wanted to. So we have done that now. So that's just like if you're just adding straight to the fermenter, which is fine. But you'll also notice that once you get bigger, you might want to employ some other tactics to get the fruit in your tanks, because you'll get to a point where you can't go climb up on top of the tank and add it every time. So I'm going to skip down a little bit to the recirculation vessel, or a fabricated keg, which I have a picture of at the bottom left. So yeah, this is basically just a keg that you can put valves on. You could add a valve on the top, valve on the bottom. You could add the puree in there, purge it out through the bottom with a CO2 line, and then just shoot the puree in, through the top. Just basically pressurize it through the top and push it in through the bottom. And this is really useful when you're adding post fermentation. It's useful anytime. If you're adding it during fermentation, you can kind of treat it like a dry hop situation. But even with dry hopping, you'll get to a certain point where you need to start thinking about, a recirc vessel or, some other way, because again, not telling anybody what to do, but, from my own experience, the latter, it gets a little sketchy after a while, and it's just not something that I found was sustainable in the long term. So getting some kind of a recirc vessel is definitely, if you're doing a lot of puree, a lot of fruit beers using drums and whatnot, then it's definitely worth it. And that's what I was getting into with the centrifugal versus diaphragm pump. Get a lot of questions about what to use, what's better. You can use both. I've had to use both, but obviously a diaphragm pump is going to give you several advantages. It's not going to flow back. It's not going to backflow because of, the nature of the the pump, which I have right there in the middle, and like on the out right there, there's actually like two balls that are right there. So when it's pumping in from the bottom and out through the top, it's raising those balls. So there's no way that anything could backflow, because I know that this has happened to me before. You walk away for a second with a centrifugal pump. If it starts to cavitate, you're backflowing, into your drum, or, whatever. It can be a nightmare. Also with the centrifugal pumps, those mechanical seals sometimes like start leaking. And even if it's a small leak, that's just, you're gonna have some DO in with your beer. And if you're adding post fermentation, that's a big no bueno. So you're not gonna want that. And it's helpful also if you're adding a ton of puree to a tank. And anyone that has a barrel program and is also making a lot of fruit beers, they will probably have a lot of this equipment, like the Bulldog over here. And that is basically, so you'll put the Bulldog into the drum, link the hose to the bottom of this pump here in the middle, and then come out of the top going into the tank. And then, this no dissolved oxygen will come in, and you don't have to worry about it backflowing. And it'll also pump like high volumes. Like if you're pumping a lot into a tank, gravity is going to start, playing back at you if you're trying to like just pressurize it, or, use a centrifugal pump. So that's like kind of, a trick that I've had to do it both ways. We were using a diaphragm, and one of the guys accidentally hooked up a CO2 line, or a airline that had like 100 pounds of pressure on it. So we blew that diaphragm pump. So I was forced to use a centrifugal pump to add like, 5 or 6 drums of puree, which got it in there. But man, was that a pain. And just, if I had a chance to do it, both, if you have both ways, I prefer the diaphragm pump. It's definitely worth it. And then the last, but certainly not least thing that I've talked about in, I think it was a Tuesday talk on CBP, high shear pumps. So this, like with the smoothie beers becoming kind of more popular and going mainstream, along with RTDs, people have found that they want to try and get everything homogenized. Like if you're using a lot of fruit puree, you want to homogenize all of that, and you want to make sure that, you don't end up with a lot of sediment or something like super fruity on like your first run. And then it kind of tapers off, as you pull through your tank. And then at the end, you've got like whatever was left over. So there's kind of like a curve there, like this will be like a straight line, not a curve. And like using something like a high shear pump. My friend Ben Chambers that was on earlier sent me this, and this is the pump that he's going to use. They're making RTDs and also some fruited sour beers. And it's just, again, pushing that envelope and, just coming up with new ideas. This was new to me about a month ago when we had this presentation. And I've had people reach out and ask more about it. And, this is basically the pump that they're using. And, do your own research, of course. But this is a good place to start. And the demos on these things is really cool to watch, because, you can imagine just, with some of our purees, they're a little bit thicker than others. And you don't have to worry about, a ton of sediment getting into one can, or worse, like clogging your filler or something like that. So these basically go in line with the process, and they just chew up every bit of fruit pulp that might be in the puree, and just homogenize it with everything else, like whether it be beer, liquor, seltzer. It can really help in a lot of ways. Looking to see how many comments yet. So, and then right here. So this is, we love our farmers. When you support AFP, you're helping lift them up from producing a legitimate crop to creating hundreds of jobs. This is our social commitment. So yeah, this is like where we get into the kind of wild, wild west part of Colombia. It's, it was, torn apart over like the past couple decades due to what. And so right now these guys are, they're growing a legitimate crop. And this, when all that stuff happened, like in the 80s and 90s, they had to kind of, reevaluate things. And it's kind of similar in Mexico too. When people are trying to make a living, they go for, the easiest thing, as many of us would. And that was illegal drugs back then. So now they've kind of turned over a new leaf, and we're really happy to, be a part of that and helping, support these farmers who are very important to us. And like farmers, no farmers, no beer, no farm, no beer. And it's really interesting. I haven't got a chance to go visit yet, but I hope to in the next year. And I'd like to go, shake hands with some of these guys and just, kind of check it out and see, what it's like down there. And so when you support AFP, you are supporting these guys. And it's something I didn't even think about until we started doing some work with Bottle Share, which is a nonprofit that's basically similar to Giving Kitchen for restaurant workers. If anyone who's familiar with Atlanta or across the country knows about that. So that's a great, it's a great, I want to say company. It's not a company. It's it's just a great, great cause and nonprofit. It's they have the classification where they can, they have to give away pretty much everything. So all of your money goes to them. So in that same way, we're kind of trying to, help give these guys a, leg up and, help get out of that situation they were in for so many years. With any agricultural product, there are several factors to consider: where the fruit is grown and the specific conditions they are grown under, specific climate and soil that gives them a unique flavor. And yeah, this is similar to terroir. If we were talking about like wine and the grapes that make them. So our purees being grown, in the Amazon, tropical. Some of them are grown like in the mountains. That'd be like the berries and stuff. And then some are more like in like the jungle, and that's like where you get your tropicals from. And that is basically why our purees are a little bit different than what you might be used to if you've used some purees that are perhaps sourced stateside. So I thought that was something that was kind of a selling point for me when I first got involved with this company. as a customer, I thought it was really interesting that they had such a different catalog of purees and that they were different. And I thought that like set my beers apart from, like other beers that, maybe, everyone happens to be using, a certain puree or, a certain, supplier. So it was really cool, for me to kind of, use that as a way to set myself apart. And with that, the flavor profile will be a little bit different compared to, some things that you'll see, from other places. And, if you think about it, these are like agricultural products change, from year to year. Some crop years are better than others. I was watching the country malt presentation, about barley, and that was very interesting because it's, it's something that sometimes it's hard to realize when you're like in the brewery and you just get all this in and you're just like used to it being similar and the same. And then you realize that like, oh, wow, this is, coming from the earth. And, there are factors that, are beyond our control sometimes. For instance, raspberry, that's been a tough crop for this past year because of climate conditions around the world. And that's something that we're working with to try and just basically let people know if we're seeing these variations and, do what we can to just inform people, because we didn't really know what was going on for a while, due to just, the lot to lot variation. Some were good, some, but then we started getting into some that were, just changing color, and it's like the pigment seemed to be dropping out of the puree for whatever reason. But we basically chalked it up to the crop year being bad. And this is similar to last year. Blackberry was kind of a similar situation. So berries are, in a league of their own with fruits. And so that's something just really important to kind of realize and work with. And something I got from that country malt presentation was that, diversifying crops, like which we're doing with Mexico, which, we're just trying to find other places to source from, just to, make sure that we will have that supply for you. So that was pretty interesting. But yeah, that's basically kind of wrapping it up. But I can take some questions if anyone has any. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to go back over and see if there's anything that I missed, and see if any questions come in or anything that I could elaborate further on. So I'm just going to go back here a couple slides, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about sorry about that. I know it's day 3 and everyone's been watching for 3 days. So I appreciate you sticking with us on this. And thanks again to Andrew and CBP and the sponsors. This is like really important to get involved like in the community. And, basically my door is always open. Oh, great. Facebook user saying that they are a little late, said that they've used AFP in the past and they started using it from now on. Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, like I said, my door is always open. You can call me anytime. A direct line to me is 470-621-9168. And if there's anything that was in this presentation that I glossed over that you'd like to hear more about, or if you have any questions about this puree or any of the things that we talked about, happy to talk more about that. And yeah, thank you for listening. One thing, I think I've got like a couple more minutes here, and I just kind of want to go back over sorry. Let's see. Yeah, just it'd be good to go back over kind of like these. I think the most useful thing in this presentation is the equipment that we're using and that you could employ in your brewery, because this is really what is making the difference and helping streamline your process about, basically just make things easier on yourself. These fabricated kegs, you can make them. If you have a welder, awesome. If you know someone who you want to trade some beer to weld you up one of these, that would be cool. These diaphragm pumps are kind of an investment, but definitely worth it, especially. And if you have a barrel program, you can also use that if you're using I really need to look in the bag opener. Whole comedy shows could be made of my opening them. That's true. We could definitely make one of those ads that's like all in black and white and they're having like a terrible time. And then, the color comes in and they're like, oh, it's so easy. Those are on our website, and, hit me up. Happy to, throw one of those in for you if you're making a purchase, because it's definitely useful to have, and I appreciate someone asking about that, because it's pretty spot on what they just said. But all right, so I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I really appreciate everyone bearing with me. And like I said, reach out to me anytime if anything in this conversation or presentation I glossed over or, wasn't, clear on. And, just keep preaching the fruit gospel. All right, take it easy. I am out of here. Cheers.